From a highly secured network of top secret locations across South Texas, this is the Spurs Insider, another edition, summer edition, post-draft, in the middle of free agency. I'm your host, Mike Finger, joined by our usual panel of Express News beat writers Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn, along with sports editor Nick Talbot. The Spurs added a 19-year-old point guard of the future, maybe, a 39-year-old point guard of the present. Jeff, where do you want to start? It's been a heck of a week.
I was going to say this is about the 101st reason why I don't want to be you, the host of this podcast. We have so much to talk about, and I don't know how you're going to fit it all in. And
there are many other reasons why you do not want to be me.
That's why I said 1,001st.
This should not rank in the top 1,000, so I think we've started out with an accurate ranking. I'm going to leave it up to you. Do you want to start with the young guy or the old guy? I think both of them are compelling. Both of them tell the story of your San Antonio Spurs heading into another pivotal year in their history. I think both of them tell the story of the way this rebuild is unfolding and the way this plan is developing, kind of an equal measure. And just to review, it's been a busy 7 days since we last entered the digital players, the earbuds, the car speakers of our avid listeners. In that time, the Spurs chose Stefan Castle of UConn with the 4th pick in the 2024 NBA draft. They traded the 8th pick outrageously, according to some out there in podcast land, maybe even some on this podcast. And then they signed the longtime nemesis, the 39-year-old Chris Paul, who played in two of the most memorable playoff series the Spurs have ever played, particularly in the last 2 decades. 2 Game 7s. He lost a Game 7. He won a Game 7. Again, I'll go back to you, Jeff. Where do you want to start? What's more interesting to you?
Well, I guess just let's just start with the old guy, since that's the most recent transaction, and we can work backwards there. How about that?
Okay. What do you think about Chris Paul?
I think for what the Spurs are asking him to do, and the amount of money they paid him and the length of time they're going to pay him, I think it's a good move. It's a good little fill in the blank kind of transitional move. I think it's the kind of move a lot of people in Spurs land, a lot of Spurs fans were kind of hoping would happen last year to sort of ease the Victor Wembanyama transition into the NBA. It seems like the Spurs were content, and not even content, but their outright plan last year was to just see how everything looks on its own and decide what they needed from there. And I think at some point last season, it's fair to say they decided, holy crap, we need a point guard that knows what he's doing, because nobody else can really develop the way we need him to develop if there's not a point guard that knows what he's doing. And Trey Jones was as close as they had to that. Bringing in, a guy that is within the discussion of best point guard of all time, even though he's 39 and is not an all-star anymore, I think that totally fits the bill for what they want. And, I can't really see the downside. Like, I even try to picture, like, if this goes as horribly as it could possibly go, he's not on the team next year. Like he's just, it's a very low cost move to bring in some experience and someone that can show the guys some ropes. It's linked to the guy that they drafted on last Wednesday, Stephon Castle. Show him the ropes. Show everyone the ropes. Throw lobs to Victor Wembanyama. How many times do we talk on this podcast and fans talk in the internet space about how many times they missed Victor on a lob last year? Well, he just added the NBA's all-time active assist leader, so he can show them how it's done. So all that put together, it's a good short-term move for this team, and it does not push them into playoff contention, I don't think, but it does solidify that position very much so.
The reason it's hard to write the lead here, to use some journalism speak, to find the headline, to decide on which transaction we talk about first, is because they're so interconnected, right? And the kind of explaining the Spurs offseason isn't a one sentence deal. because what they're doing is, and we can go back to the Stefan Castle pick, we can go back to the trade of the number 8 pick for a pick that won't. It's in 2031 is the first rounder that they got for that number 8 pick from Minnesota, the right to switch in 2030. So there's all kinds of different, on the surface, messages here, right? You signed a 39-year-old, many-time All-Star, greatest point guard of all time, as the 1-year win now stopgap, and you also traded your number 8 pick for a pick 7 years down the road, and you drafted a guy who wants to be a point guard and probably will not be a point guard right away because Chris Paul is here and Tre Jones is still here. So there are these mixed messages on the surface, but when you think about it, this is what the Spurs are doing, and I want to bring Tom into this as well. But the plan here is, as I've written in the newspaper, and you can find it on expressnews.com, along with all our draft coverage, all our free agency coverage. Needed another shout out to the work that sports editor Nick Talbot's staff is doing on that. The plan here is to win many championships. The Spurs are not content to make one big run under Victor Wembanyama. They have been gifted this basketball miracle of winning that lottery last year, and they don't want to try to win the championship in 2026. They don't want to try to win one championship in 2027. They want to compete for every NBA title from like 2027 to 2035. And that sounds overly ambitious. That might be unrealistic in the modern NBA, but that's what they're trying to do. And so when you take all this together, every move they make this offseason, every move they've made so far in the Victor Wembanyama era has been to ensure that they retain that flexibility, that ability to just reload and be their best every year from like 2027 into the next decade. And so that's why all these moves kind of make sense together in that context, because you take the long-term guy in Castle, who I think could be here a long time. That's the guy they targeted. That's the guy who, if he doesn't become a point guard, can just be a lockdown defender on the wing for many years to come. And you put him on the same defense with Victor Wembanyama, you've got a good defense, no matter who else is out there. And then instead of using the 8 pick on a guy who might have a couple of good years and then gets expensive, you flip that into an asset that you can use, not necessarily in 2031, but in a couple of years if you're going to make a trade. That asset is more available than a Rob Dillingham would have been 2 years from now, unless Rob Dillingham really turns out to be great. Like, that's a bit of a gamble. And then in the meantime, like, you don't want to be terrible. And like Jeff said, you don't want to go through another season where you don't have good point guard play and where people are missing Victor Wembanyama on lobs. So you sign a guy that comes in and has made every team that he's ever played for better. That's the other Chris Paul thing. He's played for 4 or 5 teams in his NBA career. Every time he's joined a new team, that team has been better, including last year with Golden State. Like, Golden State was better, even at age 38, Golden State was better with him on the floor than they were with him off the floor. So put all this together, and you got a team that's trying to show a little bit of improvement now, but still keeping the long term in mind. And I think it's not a bad idea. Tom, I want to get your take on all that.
Yeah, they struck a good balance there. Castle's long term. I mean, he has the potential to be a very good player for this team for a long time. And, the trade, they acquired assets that could potentially be very beneficial down the road. It's maybe not even down the road, let next year being down the road, when the free agent market and the draft are much richer than they are now. And then with Chris Paul, you get a guy, as Mike just said, he makes them better. He helps Wemby score a ton of points, adds a lot of excitement in that regard. Gets them maybe into playing contention.
Yeah.
There's no downside to that. They need that right now. They can't afford, as we talked before on this podcast, they can't afford another year in the 20s. They can't afford another 20-something win season. They've got to start showing some improvement, some excitement. And as you wrote, in your column, Mike, about this topic, looming over all of this is the stadium push, the arena push. So yeah, it's a good stopgap move. Like I said, the exciting thing is he's going to make Wemby so much better. I mean, and Wemby's already great, but I mean, the points are going to come big time now. So yeah, I think it's a good balance.
Yeah, no, that's good. And just to explain the arena factor for the people who like the very few people in the world who do not read Mike Finger columns on the regular. Like I know that that's ridiculous to assume that people wouldn't read that, but the very few people who don't. The point I brought up there was in the next couple of years, the Spurs are going to be making a push to build a downtown arena. I think there's been a lot of reporting in the Express News about that, about the talks they've been having with the city.
Yeah,
and
reporter Madison Isler has been killing it on that topic.
She has
really good story.
And presumably they're going to ask for public help, and it's easier to ask for public help. I'm not going to make any editorial judgments here on whether people should or shouldn't support that, but it's easier for the Spurs to ask for that if they're not a 22-60 team. And, you can sell the future of Victor Wembanyama. People here are really excited about that. I think a lot of fans understand that this is a long-term rebuilding process, but it's just sort of, I'm just keeping it real, as I tell people at the end of the podcast, in that it's hard to make that ask if you're just getting whipped every game like the team was last year. And so I think that there is, and even if you take that out of the equation, you don't want just misery year after year at the start of a rebuilding project. And that's why I think this balance that Tom referred to makes so much sense, where you keep all your options open for next summer. You keep all your options open for the later Wembanyama years, the later part of this decade, while showing some improvement this year with some sensible moves like Chris Paul. Jeff McDonald's had some reporting about how the Spurs are going to fill out the rest of this roster this summer, probably, unless something big comes up, with one-year type deals, which makes a lot of sense in this class. To just sign one-year type guys that can help you move up, like Tom said, to maybe the play-in race this first year. That would be a great step for this franchise, just to show some progress, and then give you the flexibility, the space, the opportunity to really take advantage of next year's trade market, next year's draft class, all that stuff. I think a lot of this makes a heck of a lot of sense. Jeff, jump in there on that.
Going back to just a remark about the arena push, like the Spurs have some really talented marketing wizards out there, but it's tough to say, give us $1 billion because we have pick swaps in 2030.
Exactly.
That's not a really good a ploy there. It's better to say, we're a playoff team with Victor Wembanyama. That generates a lot more excitement. So
and the old time listeners of this podcast remember that the last time the Spurs got public money to build an arena, like the timing couldn't have been more perfect. It was that was the fall of 1999,
coming off the very first title.
Yes,
we weren't even jaded yet.
Right. The Spurs win their first NBA title in the history of the franchise, and then voters go to the poll and say, "Heck yes, we're going to revitalize that rodeo that had a Freeman Coliseum neighborhood."
How's that going, by the way?
With the new arena that's going to become an entertainment district all around the rodeo. Like that was. It hasn't happened yet, but there's still time. There's still time.
I mean, now all the bars and restaurants that we have to walk by after the game,
Yeah.
Chris Paul. Well, maybe it's too early to do the speculation, but are we thinking he's going to start and play 35 minutes a game? Or are we looking at a 20 minutes a game type of player at age 39? Are we thinking maybe he begins the year as a starter and eventually transitions to the bench as other players come along? What's our thoughts on how the Spurs deploy that guy?
Don't know yet, but if he's on the court at the end of the games, they're going to win a lot more.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. It's
We
almost
saw him
like
do that.
they
We
could-
saw him do that last year against the Spurs. I
it's
mean,
Yeah.
if they could have
against
just
them,
if they
yeah,
could have just
closer.
signed him for like the last 2 minutes of like 10 games last year, they
Exactly.
maybe win 8 more games.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they get to 30 wins last year if they just have him for 10 2-minute stretches at the end of the games. That's a good point. If he's on the court at the end, they're gonna fare a lot better for sure.
Well, I don't think he's a 35-minute a game player anymore, so you're not getting.
Yeah, I agree.
35.
I wanted to lay that out for fans there that think.
But if you get 25 minutes a game out of him, I think he's a lot likely to stay healthy. Because at 39 years old, it's not exactly the easiest thing to stay healthy. As he approaches 40s in the NBA, I think you got to start him though. At the very least, start him at the very beginning of the season. Kind of show Castle the ropes. I think that's the goal. I think that's what everyone kind of sees. Trey Jones goes to the bench, just like we've been talking about for how long in this podcast? A long time. Where he's going to be really thrive in that role, be a little bit better. That's kind of his NBA role. It allows him to do that, feel comfortable in that position. And I think by the end of the season, though, I kind of think you want to go back to experimenting maybe and hope that Stephen Castle can be the guy that's running the point, and then maybe you bring Chris Paul to close a few games.
I think I can predict that Jeremy Sohan will play 0 minutes at point guard this season.
God,
I think they've done the work to make that a reality, unless like a bunch of people get injured.
We don't know what the details of the conversation between Greg Popovich and Chris Paul were, but like down to the sentence. But I feel really, really confident that part of Pop's pitch was you can come here and start.
Yeah.
And because again, Chris Paul, he's not the old Chris Paul. He's not prime Chris Paul. He doesn't have contenders beating down his door with offers, which is one reason why he's coming to a team that lost 60 games last year. But part of the pitch had to be you come here and start. And so I think that's why I believe that when you're running through all the lineup possibilities, and there still are a lot of permutations because there's a number of different ways the rest of this offseason can go. We're taping this on Tuesday morning. By the time listeners hear this later in the day or Wednesday morning, the Spurs might have made another huge move. But I still feel like part of the deal was, to a guy like Chris, out of respect, is you come here and start. And I think that the Castle point guard thing, yes, he wants to play point guard too, but I don't think the Spurs necessarily feel obligated to follow through on that wish. I mean, they have him. And if they feel like he fits in better as a wing, I don't think they're going to force the point guard issue with him unless it makes sense for everybody. I'm sure he'll get a chance at some point. But if they decide he's better playing 2 or 3 than at point guard, I think that everybody will be on board with that. Also, Jeff asked about starting lineups. Like I think the givens are Chris Paul at 1, Devin Vassell at 2, Victor Wembanyama at 5. And then depending on who else is signed, like I could see it go a number of different ways. I think Jeremy Sohan, if he's around, is probably a starter. But what if there's a question mark I have about the lineup with the way the team is constructed so far, is they still haven't gotten that shooting that they needed. And I think that's what's going to be priority 1, 2, 3 for the rest of this offseason. Because I don't think what you can do now is start a lineup of, if your best 5 guys are Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Stefan Castle, Jeremy Sohan, and Wemby. That's 3 guys who aren't, and Chris Paul can make a 3-pointer, like his efficiency's still okay. He's not a volume 3-point shooter. That's not his job. His job isn't to shoot 3-pointers. His job is to set up for other guys. And that lineup, you really just have Devin Vassell as a 3-point guy and Wemby. Jeremy Sohan's not a shooter. Stefan Castle's not a shooter yet. That's going to be the issue with that lineup. So I just wonder if, and maybe you bring Keldon Johnson back into the starting fold. Maybe Keldon Johnson still is not on the trade market, but could be your biggest trade chip if you want to acquire someone else this offseason. I still think we have to wait to decide what the starting lineup is, because I think there's a key piece to be added, whether it's a 1-year veteran guy, whether it's, I also want to throw out on this podcast the possibility of the biggest move the Spurs could still make this offseason. Now that Trae Young is 100% off the table, now that Darius Garland, I think, is 100% off the table, I don't think you go acquire any other point guards on the trade market anymore. I think the one that looms is Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz, who may or may not be available, who's 27 years old, just like created in a lab to play power forward alongside Victor Wembanyama. Do the Spurs feel the same way? Do the Spurs feel like that's worth kind of getting ahead of the rebuilding plan and adding him right away? I'm not sure. But man, if you just envision a lineup of Markkanen, that stretch four, knockdown, 3-point jump shot guys next to Victor, Sohan playing the three, just locking people down on defense, along with Devin Vassell at 2, and then either like Castle or Paul at point guard. That's a heck of a lineup. Does that entice you enough to start cashing in some of these chips now on a guy like Markkanen?
Markkanen was the guy Spurs fans were salivating over. They wanted to get him from the Bulls in the DeRozan trade, but the Spurs kind of prioritized picks in that situation.
And again, that got him Wemby.
Exactly. If they do prime Markkanen in there, they don't end up with Wemby. So good work, Brian Wright.
We talked last week about people emerging in free agency, that something emerging where they jump on it, and I think this is the case. I think they should jump on that.
You would jump, so that would be like the salaries aren't difficult to match up in a trade like that. Like I think he makes about what Keldon makes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you've got the cap space, you can just absorb him into there. Right.
Had
to. They don't want.
So he's at 18. He's at 18 this year. So, and then
well, the other issue there is he's an expiring. So you would need some kind of assurance that you can re-sign him long term. And I'm not sure if that's an obstacle there, but I think it's the type of deal that the Spurs would consider, as opposed to, and I want to sort of toot our podcast's own horn a little bit here. From the beginning, I think all of us have been pretty definitive that Trae Young was not coming, right?
Yes, I never thought that was.
This wasn't a real good fit. Never was a good fit. I mean,
and
it's a good fit.
He's not coming.
He's
not coming. So, but I think this makes a lot more sense than the Trae Young thing ever did. He's a guy that could sort of grow with the Spurs. He's on their same timeline, especially if you can re-sign him to his next extension. Now, this may or may not happen. Like, it's really hard to do deals with Danny Ainge, and
I was
good about it.
I was going to say.
Danny Ainge is a tough negotiator, man, and that's what makes me skeptical that this could happen, because it's hard to do a deal with Danny Ainge. It's hard to win a deal with Danny Ainge. He's going to ask for a lot, and so it'd be like Keldon Johnson or Jeremy Sohan plus a lot of picks. And is that how you want to use your picks on Lauri Markkanen? I don't know. But it's interesting.
Based on the reporting, it sounds like they're going to have some competition with Golden State for Markkanen. And Golden State, I don't know. They seem more desperate to me, especially to get under the out of tax hell.
Yeah.
So I think Danny Ainge could go in there and really extract a lot of players out of there. Because the Warriors seem like they're going to be motivated to shed salary. So
here's where the Spurs have left, and I'm not saying they should do it, and maybe they shouldn't, especially if the Warriors offer as much as they might offer. The Spurs have the treasure chest to trump pretty much any offer if they wanted to.
Picks wise,
that might or might not be wise. But if it gets into a bidding war of draft picks between them and Golden State, that San Antonio can outspend them.
Yeah.
San Antonio can outspend most teams in terms of draft picks. It's just a matter of, do you want to use those now? I'm not sure they should.
He's
But it's something to think about.
He's an all-star in his prime. And I just looked up his 3-point shooting last season, 40% on 8.0 attempts.
Yeah.
That would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah,
Now he's not known as the best. He's not known as the best defender in the world, but when you again, if you play him at the 4 between Sohan at the 3 and Wemby at the 5, that covers a lot of faults. And from what I've heard, like he tries, and he has the building blocks of an adequate defender. It would be a fun mix. I'm not sure they'll do it. It might not be the smartest move long term to use your chips that way, but it's an option. Another thing I wanted to mention from the past week, I mentioned Trae Young in passing. The Hawks traded my old friend, and I guess what is it, a debtor, debtor or debtee? He owes me money. DeJounte Murray is moving to New Orleans. Still owes me $1.
Can pay you in days.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is that where the debt was incurred? Where?
No,
What?
Dallas.
Dallas.
Okay.
Dallas.
That DeJounte borrowed $1 from me in Dallas, never paid me back. Happy for DeJounte to get another chance to show off his stuff. But the future of Atlanta is fascinating, and it represents one of the biggest heists of the past several years in the NBA, that DeJounte trade from the Spurs to Atlanta. Because now the Hawks are in a situation where people are telling them, tear it down, rebuild, start over. And they can't do that because the Spurs control their next 3 drafts. If the Hawks tear it down and actually get lucky enough to win the next 3 lotteries, the Spurs get the number 1 pick all 3 years. The next 3 Atlanta lotteries are completely unprotected. The Spurs get their pick. The one in the middle, the second one, it's a pick swap. But it's outrageous what the Hawks gave up to get DeJounte, who they ended up unloading for much less to New Orleans. And so I made the point last week, if the Hawks were to tear it down and to get rid of Trae Young, they have no choice but to do it with the Spurs, and the Spurs don't want Trae Young. So the Hawks are over a barrel, and that could produce some nice stuff for the Spurs in the years to come, because the Hawks don't look like they're contenders. The Spurs could end up getting 3 more lottery picks out of that. And if the Spurs, you kind of just sit there and watch it happen. I don't think you feel the need to help them out at all by giving any of those picks back for anything.
That has to factor into what they're thinking long term too, then, right? I mean, that's if the Spurs are confident they're going to get 3 lottery picks, or 3 fringe lottery picks, then
yep.
When you're factoring on those things, when you're saying, okay, well, this year we have 2 lottery picks, we don't like what we're seeing. Next year we think we're going to get 3. Let's go ahead and trade one of those lottery picks because we're going to add those parts to the salary cap next season. Yeah, I think that's when you're looking at the Rob Dillingham trade. I don't think a lot of people are seeing that it's really a they're just trading some salary cap because they expect salary cap to come back next season as well, because they're going to have their own pick. They're going to have the Hawks pick. They might even have the Bulls pick. I think that's top 10 protected. So you're looking at a lot of salary cap moving in those things too, because you're going to keep adding on with those picks as well.
They're probably not going to have Charlotte's pick though.
Right, you're probably not going to have Charlotte's pick. That's not coming.
But maybe.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. I wouldn't bet on it. That's why I didn't bother to mention it. But
let me ask you this:
you could be adding on all those things, so they're really kind of navigating the salary cap thing as that comes into play a lot of this, where you're looking at it and it's going to go from, I think, 136 from last season to 145.5 this season, and then when this new TV deal hits, this also helps the Spurs favor a little bit when you're trying to plan this Wembanyama thing and trying to because you can't do 3 big superstars like you used to be able to without Wemby's salary being low, right? So you're looking at adding these pieces, $7 million, and then increases to 155, and then 170, then 185. So you're looking at like $15 million increases possibly because the new TV deal, and those line up with Victor Wembanyama's last 2 years of his rookie contract, whereas this year you're only looking at like a $4 million increase. So you're looking at being able to add even a bigger piece in those other years because of those increases. Now, other people, because once you sign on those guys, they're getting a percentage of the salary cap, right? Because that's where their max deals are part of, and that's why they get so big. So a lot of that all kind of comes into play. And so when Spurs fans are saying, I want this guy now, please look at the salary cap and see what the Spurs are doing, because they're really trying to navigate it, I think. And
Yeah.
Let me ask you this.
on this big player.
Let me ask you this: if in a hypothetical negotiation with Danny Ainge for Lowry Markkanen, he demands a 2025 first round pick. Would you rather offer him the Spurs 2025 first round pick next summer or the Hawks 2025 pick next summer?
I'd give him my own.
Spurs, no doubt, because you're going to be better than the Hawks if you get him.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, some doubt. You never know. Trae Young could go off, learn how to play defense over the offseason, but that's very unlikely.
You want to talk about the trade that did happen on Wednesday night? The Rob Dillingham thing? You want to explain that? We got into it a little bit, but
yeah.
we're sitting there in the press room, and there are thousands of people out there at the Frostbank Plaza out there outside the Spurs new practice facility, which is that was a really nice draft party, by the way. Like, they've never done that before. This was the first draft they've had since moving into the Vic. So to have a bunch of people out there to watch it on the big screen was kind of cool. But all those people for like half an hour thought the Spurs had drafted Rob Dillingham, because that information doesn't get conveyed very clearly on television. Like, unless they were following on Twitter.
None of those guys had cell phones out there?
Unless they were following in that way. Like, this happened like 3 times in a row. I wasn't out there. I was inside working, writing, and a photographer or a cameraman that had been out there would come back into the room and say, like, wow, what do you think of that Dillingham pick? And we'd all have to tell them, well, they traded it. And that happened like 3 times in a row. So do you want to explain to Spurs fans now who still don't understand it, WTF that was all about?
Yeah, I thought I touched on this earlier a little bit,
but we could go deeper.
Okay, so let's start out with the 2024 NBA draft. By all accounts, executives, scouts, media hacks, what have you, is one of the more underwhelming drafts of the decade. Not just at the top, but throughout. Like, there's people who wonder if there might be an all-star of this draft. There usually is an all-star in the draft, but there's no obvious guys here. There's no obvious number 1 pick. There's no obvious top 3 pick. There's no obvious, like, there's 20 guys who could be top 10. Nothing really moved the needle. Another important factor to consider here is the 2025 draft is considered to be perhaps one of the most talent-laden drafts we've seen in a while. Like, it's really good. It's as bad as the 2024 draft is. The 2025 draft is expected to be that good. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the San Antonio Spurs front office, the brain trust, their objective is to win many championships in a row in the latter part of this decade, the beginning of the next decade. When you put all that together, and the Spurs did have 2 top 10 picks in this draft, which they've never had before. 2 picks in the top 10. People get really excited, including members of the Spurs front office. Like, they're humans. There are people in the front office who've spent years of their lives scouting some of these players who are available in this draft. You start to fall in love with them. It's only natural, right? Like there were guys that certain members of the Spurs front office were excited about taking at number 8, just because, you develop an affection for some of these guys. But the point is, for the Spurs timeline, do you really want to sign a second player from this draft and start that clock on their rookie salary, on their extension, what have you, when maybe the person you take at 8 isn't that doesn't live up to what a number 8 pick should be. Like if you're underwhelmed by him, if you're not absolutely sure of what he's going to be, then why start that clock? Why put that on your books? Why be in line to give him a raise in 3 years, 4 years, when you could turn that into an asset that might be worth much more? I'll throw another hypothetical situation for you. In 2 years, summer of 2026, there's an all-star out there, Tyrese Halliburton, somebody like that, who's dissatisfied with their current team. The Spurs are making a bid for them. That team is ready to tear down what they have. They're going to start a rebuild. When you're putting together a hypothetical package in the summer of 2026 for that player, what's going to be worth more to that team? Rob Dillingham, 2 years into his career, about to get expensive, who may or may not even work out. Like Minnesota likes him. He could be a great fit there, but there's a good chance, like number 8 picks bust all the time. Maybe he's already busted. He's sort of a depreciating asset if he didn't like bust the mold, if he didn't break the historical trend of number 8 picks. Like, is he going to be worth more in that hypothetical package? Or does a team that's rebuilding in 2026 say, hey, I'd actually rather have like Minnesota's first round pick in 2031? That's the thought process that goes into this.
That's the
Spurs
gamble.
The Spurs are thinking that 2031 pick for Minnesota is going to be way more valuable in 2026 or 2027 than whatever the number 8 pick becomes at that point. Like, there's a good chance the number 8 pick busts. The gamble is like Rob Dillingham might turn into an all-star, and things fall apart before then. But that's the thought process.
Not just Rob Dillingham, but any player you might have taken at that.
And I don't think that I can tell you that,
but it's still the same calculation.
I can tell you too that the Spurs had if the Spurs had not gotten that pick, if that offer from Minnesota, the Spurs did have a player. No, they had one guy.
Yeah.
They had settled on a name that it was not Rob Dillingham. They had settled on a name there at 8 that they were going to take and keep.
And that man's name was Frank Stallone.
That man's name was Frank Stallone. No, they had a player. They had settled on the name. That deal actually went down to the final seconds.
Yeah.
Where Minnesota said, we'll give you this pick. That's the pick that the Spurs wanted. And then they needed to get the name from Minnesota, and Minnesota gave them the name. Rob Dillingham, they got the name in. The Spurs, I think, beat the buzzer by just a little bit.
By seconds.
Got Rob Dillingham's name in. If they wouldn't have gotten the name, they would have just taken the guy that they had settled on and kept him. So and that speaks to, actually, that bit of intel speaks to the fact that they really did value the 2031 pick from Minnesota and the 2030 swap, which may or may not work out. I think that swap probably will convey, because you're thinking that is regardless of what happens to Minnesota, you're thinking San Antonio. That's the height of with the Wemby era, right?
Yeah. Well, I think they have another swap there too. Don't they?
Dallas too, yeah.
Dallas.
They technically got 2 swaps, so
the Spurs will get the best of those 3 picks in 2030. So that's the thought process of that, and it is a gamble and it is a risk, and I understand the frustration of fans who are like, we have this rare opportunity to take 2 top 10 picks, and you fans, like NBA scouts, like executives, fall in love with these players in the weeks leading up to a draft. You're on YouTube at work all week, right? While you're listening to our podcast, you're looking at like Dalton Connect highlights and Tejan Salon highlights, and you want to take them.
It's more fun to see your team say a name there than to say come back in 2031. It's just more fun.
Yes,
more fun isn't always the best decision. You don't make the best decisions over fun, but it is more fun. Well, as an aside to all the trade, I thought it was just fascinating, the little shot ESPN had during the draft of the Spurs war room that just so happened to capture that moment with everybody on the phone making the call. There was no volume. It was like almost being like a voyeur. fly on the wall. But it was like while it was happening, like you're looking at that going, oh, that's a team that's making a trade. Like they're not just calling in a name. And it was kind of frantic. And Pop was over there like waving his arm, and RC was kind of like, then Brian Wright's on the phone. And then it's just to see Brian at the end when it's all done, just kind of toss the phone on the table like, oh, man, it was almost like he finished like a sprint or something. Like, oh, that's over.
Well, the drama there, and again, I can speak to this.
They're waiting on the name. They're waiting on the name.
It was not like the Spurs didn't know what they were going to do. They needed to get the name for Minnesota. Like the deal was in place kind of midway through the clock or late in the clock. There's only 5 minutes between picks. It's not like the NFL where I think they have 15. There's only 5 minutes between picks. So the framework of the deal with Minnesota is in place, and then they need the name, because if they take the wrong name, then Minnesota doesn't want to make the deal. So that was that was kind of fascinating to watch. You had Timmy Duncan there.
I think he just rolled out bad. Timmy's just got a cot in the back. He didn't even know the draft was happening. Like, what are you guys doing here? I was just here getting some shots up. All right, we covered the trade.
Yep.
All right, I don't know how much time we got left, but you want to talk about Stefan Castle then? That was the third thing that we were going to talk about.
You can wind it down with Stefan Castle. We're in overtime this week already, so
all right. We don't have to be at Spurs headquarters here for an hour. So
well, I'll start and then you can finish. While I was in Brooklyn for the draft, had a chance to meet Stefan for a little bit. After he was taken, seemed very Spursy. Mentioned that he likes to be low key. Mentioned how in stores there was not much to do but play basketball, and if that's San Antonio too, then he's all for it. And also got to talk to his college coach, Dan Hurley, who's won back-to-back national championships, knows a thing or two about ball. And the thing that struck me about that conversation is just that, two things. One, that the Spurs were all over him from the beginning. Spurs had looked at him in high school, or were aware of him in high school. And Hurley told me that the Spurs were one of the few teams who were in stores all the time last year. And some teams would come in for a practice, come in for a game. He said the Spurs had guys up there for days at a time. Would go to multiple practices, multiple games in a row, that they were all over Stefan Castle. And if you're a Spurs fan, I think that makes you feel a little good about the pick there, because the Spurs know what they're getting. They probably know Stefan Castle better than any other team in the league. And for them to know him that well and to take him, I think speaks volumes. Another thing was just the way that Hurley described Castle's mentality, just very Spursy. The ability that he said some nights we needed him to be the leading scorer, some nights we needed him to be connective tissue, I think is the term he used. And just Stefan had the desire, the ability, the willingness to do anything needed to win. And that he was on, as a freshman, he was often the best player on the team that won the national championship. That's encouraging. The discouraging thing is the 20-something% 3-point shooting. The mechanics are good. Hurley says the mechanics are good. I think the Spurs people told Jeff and Tom the same thing, that there's a good base there. You can build on that. It is yet another guy that the Spurs are going to have to kind of teach to shoot, which is the downside here. But a lot of positives here from my point of view on the Stefan Castle pick. Jeff, you can...
we talked about how weak this draft pool is, but also just historically, because there's going to be an all-star there. And there's always an all-star. In every draft that's ever existed, there's been an all-star. And if you talk to scouts around the league, even before the draft, Stefan Castle's name was the one that would come up a lot. If they had to pick the guy that's going to have that kind of ceiling. In this poor draft, Stefan Castle's name was the one that was mentioned a lot. So I think if it's possible to get a steal at number 4, the Spurs might have done it, especially if he can get that shot in line. I don't know if that's a one-season thing. But other than that, I mean, he defensively, the Spurs just got a massive upgrade over anything. And even if he replaces Trey Jones in that starting lineup, Trey Jones was a very try-hard defender. I mean, he did his best and played his butt off defensively, and for his size, is a good defender. but that for his size is an important caveat there. I mean, there were so many times Trey would play an amazing defensive possession, but give up a shot because the guy he was guarding was 6'5". Well, now you have a 6'6" guy in that situation. So he's going to improve. Him and Victor guarding pick and rolls is going to be a sight to behold. And he's also just got such a good basketball IQ that I think he can fit in well offensively, even as he waits for that shot to come along. Like he's going to be one of those guys that's not going to have trouble finding Victor for lobs and dunks. So I think overall it's a good pick for what they needed. He's got a nice floor, but he's also got a pretty high ceiling as well, and that's a good thing to get out of this draft because there weren't a lot of those guys that had both.
Yep. Tom, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think, if you take the Spurs at their word, if you take Hurley at his word, I don't think shooting's very much a concern at all. Just wasn't called on to do it last year. He can do it. It just wasn't necessary for him at Connecticut. And back to
and that goes, and the deal there is like he wasn't called on to work on it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think when they get him in the gym and really said you need to improve this jump shot, that's where it comes from.
Back to the trade. I think if you sit down, you listen to the Spurs rationale objectively, you listen to their case objectively, I don't know how you can come away with that without thinking that was a pretty prudent thing to do. And it very well may pay off. Now, in this day and age, common sense and prudence doesn't go very far in some
Listen, every time Rob Dillingham comes off the bench in Minnesota this year and scores 16 points and like hits a game-winning 3 against Utah or whatever, like we know we're going to hear, right? Like how badly did the Spurs screw this up? Like how great would Rob Dillingham look with the Spurs? That goes with it, and that almost makes it more bold because the Spurs know that there's a possibility for it to look bad in the short term.
Yeah, it's instant gratification versus long-term prudent thinking.
Right, and it's not guaranteed to work, but I think the rationale behind it makes a lot of sense.
You're not going to believe this, but when you talk to like the guys that make millions of dollars to make these decisions, they've actually thought this through. And they can explain it to you. And maybe it doesn't work out. And maybe you can listen to them explain it and say, yeah, well, I still wouldn't have done it. But it's like sometimes you think, I don't know. I get frustrated with fans because they act like this hadn't been thought through. And they're just pulling out their butts or whatever. And this has been way more thought through from every angle and nuance. This been thought through from nuances that we don't even know. Like we don't even know what we don't know when we're critiquing the deals. So
I'll close with this. We've gone way over this week, which is fine.
The megapod. We call it a megapod.
It's a megapod. When the Spurs do something like trade that number 8 pick on Wednesday night, and the immediate reaction, including from me, including from us, is why did they do that? I think our jobs are to explain why. Not necessarily to defend why.
Correct.
Like there's a difference between defending why they did it and explaining why they did it.
Some people out there in the social media sphere don't understand the difference. Like explaining isn't necessarily defending.
Right. And so if your reaction is why did they do it? Like I think part of what we try to do here on this podcast at expressnews.com in the Dead Tree newspaper is to offer the explanation. And it's not necessarily a defense. I will come out openly and say this might not work out, but that's I think what we did here this week is sort of explain it. And if you could, and I'm perfectly okay with people out there saying I disagree. I think that was dumb.
Sure,
that's your right. But like Jeff said, like a lot. This was not a slapdash spur of the moment type of thing. I think a lot of thought went into this. It might not work out, but all we can do is just offer the explanation. We had we were able to talk to people and get the explanation, and there it is. So do with it what you will. Maybe while we were recording this, between the time we record this and the time you listen to it, like the Spurs will have made another mega trade. I don't know. Maybe this whole podcast is already obsolete. We'll see. But if they do that, we'll get back and talk to you soon. Even if they don't do that, we'll get back and talk to you soon. Until next time, take care of each other and keep it real.